Precog time number 29. We're seasoned at this already at this point. It marks probably the 1-year anniversary of the Precog talks, actually, more or less, because we started them at the beginning of the pandemic. And we're really, really happy to be talking tonight with Nancy Smith, who's a veteran New Yorker, although she's decamped to Jersey City recently. Or I guess like within the past decade, and who's been in New York, part of the art scene, making artwork and being a part of the city for decades. We're so excited to get to talk to her, and we also just wanted to do a brief plug that Nancy is going to be in a pop-up show organized by Contra Gallery, tentatively titled FOMO, and curated by Alfredo Martinez, which should be opening on April 15th in Chelsea. And I hope that everyone will get to see her. Sorry?
23rd Street.
On 23rd Street. So I hope everyone gets to go see the show and support Nancy. And we wanted to start this out the same way we start all of our talks, which is to ask you what you've been up to in the pandemic and how you're doing.
Start. It'll just go down south. It's better to, it was really rough, and let's leave it at that. I had a sudden, like, really big loss, and it was really hard. Yeah.
And not going into the city.
And plus, like, not being able to go into the city, you know, and not going to openings in person, you know.
Yeah, and you go to so many, you have a whole website. When did you start that, documenting openings?
Well, when did I start publishing, or when did I start taking a photo?
Well, I guess you started first, like, just, you know.
Well, what happened was I moved here in 1981 on the Lower East Side. And then when I had kids, someone gave me a camera, and we used to go to openings, and I was actually just taking pictures of my kids running around at the openings. And then it turned out like those people were getting famous, and I had the early photos. And so, you know, then I got a little more serious when I realized, like, I couldn't afford the art, but I could have the photo. And one, I could show I was there, I had been there. It's like easy to talk. I was there. But if you have the photo, right, no brainer. So I started, you know, being a little more serious when I went to the openings to document it a little more. So if you consider, I started taking the photos in like the 80s, late 80s, 80, maybe 86, I don't know. I had my first photo published in 2002. So it took 20 years for the art world to like catch up to, you know, the kind of photos I was documenting.
What was the photo of?
Oh, the first photo that got published? Yeah. Do you know who Colin Delan is? Did you ever hear of American Fine Arts? Do you know American Fine Arts, Colin Delan?
Familiar, but I can't get a visual, but yeah.
Well, he was at street where, you know, where the Journal Gallery is now, down in Soho. That was Colin Delan's space. It was called American Fine Arts.
Okay.
And Pat Hearn. Well, anyway, Colin got ill, and he was dying of cancer. But I had been, you know, moving in and out of his gallery like a kid, you know, for 10 years. So he, you know, he was seriously on the way out. It was his last actual public appearance, and he was wearing a hat, you know. He's like, and they weren't letting anyone take photos of him. But he played with me, you know, he played camera with me, and he let me get some photos. And so then someone told Walter Robinson, Nancy's got the last photos of Colin Delan, you know. And so Walter called me up and he said, oh, here you got the last photo of Colin Delan. You know, meet me meet me in the bodega on Grand Street, you know, because like to him, I was like a fly on the wall. I was nothing, you know, like all the people I knew were party people and big coming. I was just like someone in the background, but who actually had the goods, you know. It
Yeah.
took them for a while.
Yeah.
So I go to Walter and he says, just bring 10 photos of like the most recent openings you've gone to, you know, and the Call to Land. And I take them out and I show them to him and he goes, these are gold. I'm going to give you your own report on ArtNet. So I went from zero, the bottom of the pack, never published or taken seriously for what, 20 years, to being like the top, you know, photographer. Well, I shouldn't say that among many, you know, photojournalist for Walter at ArtNet.
Cool.
So
that was
Nancy,
whatever. What?
I was just gonna say, like all of the stories are fascinating, but I also just wanted to give everyone a little bit of context. So you were born in Montreal, right?
Right.
And you went and you studied there. So I was wondering if you could chart how you got to New York, why you started studying art, and like what those early kind of years were like for you.
Well, I studied art in Montreal.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I studied art like in high school, and Montreal was a time of like Leonard Cohen. You know, you ever see any Leonard Cohen documentaries?
I went to the Leonard Cohen concert.
Okay. So it was like a pretty poetic and artistic place.
Yeah.
Right, that's it. And yeah, studied there, and then I got a BFA, and then I applied to Goddard College in Vermont, and I was an exchange student there. And then I ran off to San Francisco. And then I came back and went to graduate school in Montreal and studied with Guido Molinari, who was like the most famous artist in Canada, and learned a lot of color theory and had a very good education.
And
then I got a job teaching right away out of university with my MFA for 1 year. And then they told me I couldn't do that anymore because I wasn't bilingual. And I'm like, F that. I grew up here. And you know, you don't provide bilingual education, and I make it all the way to an MFA. And then you change the rules and say you have to be bilingual to teach in university. I'm out of here. And that was it. Like 6 months later, I was in New York. I had like $2,000. And well, also, you know, it wasn't just me. Kate and Theo's dad, who was like my on-off boyfriend, he was going too. He was fed up too, you know, because like there was no way we could show in Quebec because we didn't have French DNA. Like there was like, it was already like, we were already like written off. There was no, you know, there was no future. And the art in New York was so fantastic.
So was Kate's dad an artist too?
What? Simon?
Was he an artist as well?
Yeah. And what? Sorry.
What kind of art?
Well, he was a little more private in his art, but he would be I don't know, like classic Lower East Side expressionistic.
Okay.
And you know, he also went around tearing down posters and things like that from the time, and he would collage them onto his canvases. So, you know, they became like a record of the time. Bands, he was really into bands. And, you know, so like if, for example, Colin Deland would have Simon's collages in his office, but somehow he would never show them, you know, and yeah. So, you know, like we had a pack, like Simon came first, I gave him 6 months, and then I arrived. And then, you know, I sort of stayed with some other people. And then, I don't know, we went back and forth, and then we got together. Then we had Kate. You know, but.
And so that early work that you're making, and I'm sort of riffing off of some of the information you gave us before. So when you, that second image that I showed of you with the painting that you made, the color field painting,
Right.
both you say that it references your interest in both Agnes Martin and religious Tibetan art, but it also seems to kind of prefigure some of the quilts that you would get into
I
later on.
totally, yeah, it
Yeah.
did. I mean, without knowing it. So, yeah, I had a lot of color field theory, and mixed up with Tibetan spiritualism. And somehow, when I was 16, I begged my parents for my sweet 16 present to come to New York City all by myself for a week.
And
Foreshadowed.
What?
Nan-
And that's
was
what
it
the Whitney quilt show was the Whitney survey quilt show that actually started the landmark quilt. I happened to back into seeing that, and so that started, because we don't have quilts in Montreal. Oh yeah, that painting. Oh, that's my paper quilt. Yeah, that was my first attempt at going from color field painting. That's an Amish building blocks pattern that I infused with Tibetan mysticism.
How does that figure into your work? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
What?
The Tibetan mysticism?
No, I mean, I'm just kind of joking.
Okay.
I mean, I just wasn't like a natural prayer girl.
the next image?
I couldn't just stick to red and black, red and black, red. Like that's more like, my struggle, I was doing color field, but then I was doing these like life studies, I had a range of like, was I going to go to color field or was I going to like go totally freak out, and so the quilt, I don't know, when you're young, that's why I call it autobiography, because when I was young, I was searching. I didn't really know where I was going or what I would end up doing or what was the artwork that was going to take me anywhere. And I mean, little did I know I would be a photographer for an art world journal. Like, I mean, I never studied photography for 1 second and I didn't know how to sew, so.
Nancy, can you talk a little bit about your family and like, you're like discovering these artists and flipping art to like, help your family. How did that happen?
Well, I mean, I guess it's after the fact, but we weren't legal.
Okay.
Yeah, so we didn't have, we were just getting, Canadians at some point at some point in the 70s, you could just come to New York, anywhere in the US as a Canadian, get off the airplane, go to the airport and get a social security number. But then by the 80s, we got caught up in all the immigration problems that were starting here. And that had nothing to do with Canada. And so that made it even worse, because then when I would try to clear it up, they would say like, well, Canada's in a gray area because they don't really know, you haven't really made the rules yet. And like, you're an artist, you may as well be a drug dealer. Like, just
okay.
Sink or swim. That was it. I tried 3 times. So, my husband and me, we really had to like earn a living by the skin of our teeth, by our wits. And, we were very competitive. So like, I'll give you an example. So when I left Montreal, and I actually went to live with some boys somewhere else, because, like I wasn't gonna, confine him to his commitment that he didn't want, which really got me very quickly into his house. But besides that, I had $2,000 exactly saved up. And on my first week in New York City, I think it was Pace Gallery. I saw a David Sally print edition of 10, the black ones with the garbage, the white chalk.
Okay.
And I bought it on the spot for $2,000 right then and there, within a week of being in New York City.
Wow.
And within a year, I flipped it for $20,000.
Okay.
That's how fast the art market was then. you know. And my husband used to go with a knife, and he was that guy who would, you know, blade off the Keith Haring's that were chalk on the block in the subways on the empty advertising paper.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we used to sell those. We make like $5,000 a pop.
Wow.
Every time we made money, we would, you know, we had a, you know, that was our who's that guy? Lightning painting? Jack Goldstein that you see with me and Kate. We bought the first Jack Goldstein painting for Metro Pictures, and it's his largest one. And so we put down 10 grand on it. Like, I mean, we had nothing, but we had belief. We knew, you know, what we saw. And like, you know, it would be like buying like milk for someone. We had nothing living on the Bowery in the storefront. And if you walked in, you would see paintings that were would now have a value of millions of dollars. You know, like at any one time, Jack Goldstein, Mariko Mori, you name it. So, you know, and we'd flip them. When they hit like $60,000 or $80,000, we'd sell them, and then we'd like live for 2 years.
That's amazing. So it was really like, you feel like the beginning of this like crazy art market that you could still like maybe buy something, but then it was like the prices were like going up a lot.
Well, I mean, now it's not the same. It's too fragmented now.
Okay.
Back in the 80s, there weren't as many galleries, and there weren't as many artists, and there weren't as many collectors. And so it was a more concentrated situation. I mean, like you can really buy a young artist's work now for $2,000 and hope to flip it for 5,000, even to keep the same price. And even now, like you probably have to go to auction, and I mean, it's crazy now.
It's a different like.
That, I mean, like, you know, kind of like what people are talking about, crypto art, currency art.
Yeah.
I mean, the 80s was a little hard to explain to people. It was very fast moving. But if you had the skills, you could jump in and you could play that game, you know. And then that's what, you know, we played it until it played out. Like by the 90s, you could no longer do that. You just couldn't do that anymore.
And so you were like, when you had to, I mean, it sounds like when you had to resell things, then you weren't even using like the secondary market. Basically,
No.
it was based on personal.
Some things we put to market, some things we put to auction.
Mm.
Sometimes you could resell things back to the original
person.
No, I mean, and also that was my husband's skill. Like we had different skills, so but we worked as a team. So between him and me, we had a lot of different skills that really operated well that way.
Mm.
So in other words, I could archive it. It took 2 signatures on the check to buy the work, but my husband left a party. He was a flaneur, like he was par excellence. He was classical flaneur, you know. He went to 100 openings a week. He knew everybody, you know, and so he knew a lot of big collectors, and he could do a lot of deals that I would never have been able to do because I always wanted to be like more on the street.
Mm. It also sounds like this world that you're talking about is like much more personal. Like it's an art world which was much more like closer. Like I mean, there were fewer people, but everyone knew each other. There was kind of one art world, and I'm wondering how.
Well, you have to figure out. I mean, there were no like cell phones in the 80s. There was no internet. There was no website. So if you didn't go to the opening, you didn't see the art. So if you were really into art and you wanted to see the art, you went to the openings Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and they were all below 14th Street or uptown. And so it would be the same group of people who would move, and you know, those people became like influencers. And, oh, we really like this. And so like they would go to the next show and, oh, I saw this show, Jack Goldstein, he's going to be really big, you know. And so like, you know, the big collectors would try to like listen in and get free advice, you know.
And what was it like living on the Bowery?
Well, I love to give, by the way, I gave a lot of misinformation because I don't like not getting paid. My husband gave it all away and he got really taken advantage of and really exploited, you know. But, and I told him, like, even if you tell someone not to buy it, you should get 10 grand, like that's what it's worth. And I'm not dropping names here, but someone once asked me if they should buy a Joe Bradley at $4,000. And I told her, no way. No way. You know, so, you know, I didn't really, you know, but Simon could, you know, whatever, he gave his information, but he could also sell the art to the
Nancy, what was it like to live on the Bowery when you did in the
It was
storefront?
Oh, it was tough, it was rough.
Yeah, like tell me more. So there was like gunfights on the roof?
Yeah, it was like a lot of drug dealers,
Okay.
a lot of pimping, a lot of prostitutes, you know.
And like people would die on your doorstep?
Oh yeah, people would die on my doorstep. Well, because, you know, I mean, at that point, at that particular time, heroin was seen as chic. You know, heroin is not cool. You know, nobody wanted all these kids to come to New York City and die of heroin. You know, that, like, nobody said, you know, we were doing art and making art. We weren't doing heroin. You know, we were doing business. You know, we were
Yeah.
feeding the kids and we were forwarding talent. And then you'd have all these, like, you know, people get caught up in drugs, sadly, you know. And so, you know, the whole neighborhood was like, seriously, you know, I mean, I couldn't take my kids to the park. There'd be some guy, like, you know, with a big, huge knife in his back pocket, nodding out, you know, with his kid there. Or, you know, if you were too friendly to the people across the street, you know, their mother would want to drop their kids off when she went looking for customers. And, you know, Richard Hambleton used to like pimp out his girlfriend early in the morning. It was very sad. And so, you know, we were like this little family, you know, cute little kids and, you know, relatively drug free. And, you know, so we were like a little beacon on the street. And so, you know, when people got into trouble, trying to get help or something, it was like, they were just trying to make it and they'd like OD at our doorstep. And then the cops would be like, how come everyone's ODing on your doorstep? Like, you know, are they like, are you selling drugs? And we're like, I don't know. No, we're not. They just, you know, want help. And, you know, we weren't like a drug center, you know, we weren't social workers. I mean, we could help if they had knocked on the door and asked us, but I mean, we would have called the cops. But.
Yeah, and how have you seen the neighborhood change?
Yeah, oh yeah. So, well, like in our storefront, we had the whole floor, and in the back there was a beautiful garden, like you wouldn't believe. It was like Martha Stewart on steroids, because the guy upstairs was like, he was, you know, he was like, you know, he does a landscaper, and he did like work for really wealthy people, you know, making custom gardens and I don't know, making their houses beautiful. So he had a beautiful, I mean, we even had goldfish in a little pond in our backyard. And so, you know, but I mean, seriously, the windows had concrete in front of them. It was like a bunker, you know, so no one could break in the front. And now if you go there now, there's a really trendy Japanese lifestyle store there that sells plants. And they only have half the floor that we had, and they paid 12 grand a month.
Nancy, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like to make art in all that time. And also, you know, because like a lot of your work is, and we'll bring it up in a minute, but it's like pretty lyrical, you know, like it has this kind of like, there's a lot of draped, sort of almost classically referenced sculptural forms, and they're like flowers and really beautiful, like color, prismatic color. And I'm just sort of wondering, is that related to the garden? And if you could talk a little bit about that work.
Well, I guess I felt like an outsider, you know, in terms of like the kind of art that was being shown at the time. And nobody befriended me. So, You know, like you have to think, I mean, it's this or Cindy Sherman, you know, I mean, you know. So I just was in my own head and I just painted what I wanted to paint, which was always just a continuation of, you know, that tarot cards. And I was always like, you know, kind of like a mystic, like, what the hell am I doing here? How am I ever going to get out? Like, you know, how are we going to survive? And who's going to ever like my art? And, you know, just, you know, I don't want to seem like I was really introverted because in the meantime, I was always at all the shows and taking photos. So I was, you know, some artists don't want to see other people's art. But I love seeing other people's art. But then when I came home, I just was in my own head and relating to what I saw and thinking like, well, like maybe I had seen a Jeff Koons painting or installation of like shark tanks. That was the time. And then I would come home and paint a watercolor like that. So I don't know how you make the connection, but I always stayed very driven and pure to my own expression. Always thinking I'm a loser, like what's gonna happen, you know? And kind of then I thought like, oh, I'm like a little ahead of my time. And then I thought I'm 20 years ahead of my time. Now I realize I'm like 40 years ahead of my time talking to you about my art, you know, because like even Walter, I would bring Walter all these photos, you know, the art shows, and I'd tell him about my art, or he'd see my art and he'd go like, that's not art, you know, like watercolors. I mean, you know, so it was maybe the rejection was good for me, but I mean, I don't know, I was just driven to respond to, you know, having children in my life, having
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, you know, parenting?
like what?
Like,
It
how
was
was
such a
it
good
hard?
art world.
What?
Was it hard to be a parent and an artist and, you know, make a living, all these things that you have to do?
Well, back then in the 80s and the early 90s, they would still like, they'd still be telling you, you know, if you want to be an artist, you can't be a mother. You can't have children. I mean, it's hard to believe that it was really like that. So yeah, see, like these are very wondering, like what's going to happen type watercolors, you know, like.
Yeah, they definitely share a kind of dreaminess and earnestness that a lot of figurative painters that's sort of at home with some figurative painting like now. Although I think those folks are more ironic than you are, maybe, Nancy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Should we
Go ahead,
talk
Chloe.
about We Live in Public, and maybe like, can you just, how did you get involved with this project, this documentary?
Oh,
Were you just like friends with someone? And yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
well, okay, well, that was 1999. So, you know, like we started off talking about 1980, right? And so part of my thing on the Bowery, you know, I had a lot of access to flea markets and thrift shops. And I started to see quilts and I started to see comforters that, you know, were raggedy, and or people would be selling embroidery for really cheap, couple of bucks, you know, and I wanted to archive it and learn from it. And I started to work on repairing it and using it for my family, you know, as covers and blankets. And, you know, at the same time that I was doing all these photographs and the watercolors, I was repairing quilts and having my kids, like, you know, and I became very self-taught in the quilts by doing that, taking them apart, seeing the different years. Some of them were very old, some of them were very commercial. You know, reading books, finding books, knowing the patterns. You could tell like the lifestyle of the woman who made the quilt by the stitching, by the quality of the material, you know. And they were very spiritual too, you know, like the early quilts were like quilts that were like, you know, stay strong, be protected, and you know, your mom loves you basically on your bed that you cuddle up at night, you know, because the world was so dark and stormy outside, and you were in the prairies or you were in, you know, the frontier, and you know, like your friends would all get together and make you a big trunk of quilts that you would take with you on your travels to keep you warm. And there's like a lot of sentiment. And so I became very like knowledgeable, self-taught. And well, that's when I met Alfredo Martinez, who's having the show, Alfredo.
Mhm.
So Alfredo was a young artist who wanted to like, you know, get known and be part of that flow. And so he wanted to know my husband. You know, my husband didn't really want to know about him because, you know, my husband wanted a party more. Like if he had a choice between Alfredo or someone saying like, let's go to a 5-star restaurant, he was gone to the 5-star restaurant. So like at a Marika Mori show, Alfredo was bugging him so much, he said, well, go talk to her, meaning me. And we became really good friends, me and Alfredo. And Alfredo made guns. And he needed someone who was really like skilled, who could put the guns together. Like I had that from the quilts. Like there's no sewing in the guns, but a lot of, you'd find parts in the trash and I could like glue them the right way. And I could archive his work for him. And so, you know, I was a little bit of his assistant. And then sometimes I got paid by the galleries. Like that was one of the things I also did to make money, was I was like an artist assistant, like a fabrication or archiving, you know, sometimes just for work, sometimes for pay. And so Alfredo was the one that knew Josh. Josh is the one who We Live in Public is about. So Josh was like worth $81 million. And Alfredo was like doing these big like shows for him because like his work was like, Josh didn't want any mainstream gallery artists, you know. Alfredo was really like a street artist. So Josh wanted to buy quilts to give his presents, you know, to his like $81 million friends. So somebody was getting married, and you know, like he told Alfredo, bring me someone who knows about quilts. And so he said, okay, and he brought me. And me and Josh really got along very well. And Josh would be like, oh, I need a present for like, I know the guy who runs so-and-so records and he's getting married and I want a really nice quilt for a wedding present. Like, here's my credit card. Like, go get me a quilt. In like, you know, 5,000, that's your budget. And like, then buy yourself one for 1,000 too, you know? So like, that was a really great gig. So, you know, that was great. Cause then I could go to like the quilt stores and get more influence and getting my hands on quilts. So, and you know, I would buy him like really, you know, now they would be worth a lot of money, but you know, like Mennonite Amish quilts. And then I would bring them to Josh, and Josh, like, what's this about? And then I would tell him the story of the quilt and blah, blah, you know, the pattern and how old it was. And he'd say, oh, that's great. Write it up and I'll give you another $1,000 and package it, you know, and give me back my credit card. And so I did that a few times for Josh. And so that's how I got to know Josh. I was like called the quilt lady at Pseudo. You know, he ran Pseudo and Jupiter, and they were all like tech geeks. And Alfredo had the guns, and then, you know, there was a lot of sex and rock and roll. But I was like the quilts. And you know, so it's kind of, you know, but whatever. I was pretty well organized, and it was good. Me and Josh got things very well, and he understood that quilts were like sampling and really related to computers at that time. And he was really interested. He did the first live streaming. So, you know, like he felt like quilts were like the first live streaming. Like, you know, when you went out west and you had your quilt from your family, you'd have a souvenir quilt, or your church would give you a quilt, and you would put it on your bed, and you would have the names of all the people you had spent your whole life growing up with on your bed, you know, except it wasn't the internet and Googling, it was there, you know, or they would make quilts out of fabric that had grown up wearing. So he could understand that quilts had been like an early kind of, and also quilts are very organized, and you can work at a pattern, you can work at a code. And same thing with computers. So Josh really got that, and that was really good. And so
How long were they filming?
Well, like, so what happened was, no, but at the same time, Josh was having these huge parties, like $1 million parties, but the art world poo-pooed because, you know, like it's the same thing now. It's the street art or the gallery art. You know, like nobody gets to eat the same pie. You know, nobody wants one, you know, territory, and that's too long to go into here. But you know, so Josh was having these, like, at that time. I mean, all the tech guys in New York City that made all that money, they were outdoing each other with the biggest parties they could throw, like huge lavish parties, like with 4 sushi chefs in there making your custom sushi while some live band played. While, you know, I mean, it was just incredible. Like, anyway, so Josh decided, like, for the millennium, year 2000, he was going to throw the biggest New York City art party, tech party. Okay, but he didn't tell me. But, you know, Alfredo knew about it because Alfredo was going to run a shooting gallery. But, you know, I was like walking along Broadway, Franklin, you know, and I see this warehouse building and some guys in there painting. And I'm like, hey, I can paint, you know, like for $10 an hour, I'll paint your wall white, or I'll do the detail. And the guy, he's like, okay, you know, so, you know, I started like painting, like house painting the place on Broadway. That unknown to me, was the home of We Live in Public. And so Josh walked in with his crew, you know, that he always traveled with like 5 or 6 people. He had on payroll, getting really big salaries. He walks in and he says to me, what are you doing here? I'm like, I'm painting for $10 an hour. And he says, oh yeah, okay, well let me show you, like, what do you think of this? And then he'd show me, like, someone had an installation, and then, you know, they built a dining room out of bubbles, and they had a 4-star chef, and that was an installation. I created out a shooting gallery. It's like 4 floors of people doing video, and I would like comment, or I would, well, this or that, you know. And like, so at the end of the day, I was no longer like the quilt person. I was like his right-hand liaison for the whole place, and the art parties and the art world. And I was making 10 grand a week. So that was like a pretty good gig too. And that was the start of We Live in Public. And the thing was, you know, the pods, sleeping pods, Gompert's the guy who made them, like, he already completed them. And a lot of the installations, yeah, that's me in the pod. And my son, Theo, in the pod. So, you know, it was 24/7, you slept there. It was like a residential artist place. And the thing is, I came in when a lot of those people had finished, because I was like the PR, because I was selling art and knew all the dealers and knew the DAP. Like, I could advise Josh on, no, don't go to that dealer, and I'm trying to get press there, you know, like, that person's fake, you know, yeah, you want Jeffrey Deitch to walk through, you know, things like that, you know. So he really valued that. So, but the bad part is, like, he was very competitive with his employees. So a lot of people hated my guts, because, like, I walked in towards the end, and here I was, like, you know, the boss, making, like, you know, a big salary, and I didn't even have to do an installation. I just, like, had to walk through it and make sure things got done right. So it was a little iffy, but yeah, so that's how I became part of the We Live in Public group. So I came on board like December 1999, like maybe in November. And, you know, initially I was supposed to do a quilting bee in one of the installations, but I was so busy running, like being like a showrunner, I didn't have time to do my own quilt. But I was so jealous of other artists that all I could do was to scrape together, like, from typing paper and glitter, lamps, these little, you know, like what kids make in arts and crafts, paper lanterns, right? And this is like my way of showing you how magical it was being there. Like, so, you know, I'd make like a paper lamp like that, and I'd just hang it up somewhere on some installation. And I'd come back the next day and there would be like professional lighting on it. I love that, you know, that someone was noticing them, even though they never show up in the We Live in Public footage. You know, they had some
So Nancy, what happened to this idyllic place?
It fell apart. Well, I mean, well, first of all, there were no rules, which didn't help.
So it was like anarchy.
Anarchy. I mean, there was free booze. Like
Okay.
there was a bar on every floor.
Uh-huh.
Let's not talk about anything, you know, recreational drugs. But I mean, you had 99 artists living there. 99 artists in those pods, right? Those were the artists. Then you had the crew. Like I was considered a crew member, definitely. And then it was open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
Like the midget, like when we went to a midget show in the old days, like people just streamed through and watched us work and watched us eat. And then, you know, we ate in these big dining rooms and the chefs prepared our food and everybody was making some kind of money. And, but the only rule was you couldn't leave. If you left, you couldn't come back. There was no windows, no phones, no sunlight. It, you know, there was nothing that nurtured people. And then there were a lot of people who were like had drug problems, and so you know, being around too much drugs and drink, you know, people started to go south. You know, it started off really brilliantly, but it was like a social experiment.
Yeah. And then the police came, right?
Well, no, it took a little while for the police came.
How long did it take?
Well, I mean, Quiet, that's the actual party that like We Live in Public is based on.
Yeah.
The Quiet started like the last week of December when we were living in those pods. And I think that the police shut it down on like January 3rd or 4th, so barely 2 weeks.
Okay.
And it wasn't the police, it was the fire, the NYPD, the FDNY, fire department, and FEMA. And so like, you know, Josh was very proud that, you know, like, I think on record, like we were busted by like the most top presence in the history of the art world or whatever. So, I mean, they just stormed in one day. But before that, they like FEMA, you know, like I told you, like FEMA had guys in suits, you know, trying to figure out what was happening. I thought it was like a suicide cult. And I mean, if you can imagine, I was the most normal person there. So if you could imagine, I'm pretty electric, even though I consider myself like, you know, oh, you're not going to notice me. But if you look at me in the pod, you're like, yeah, you're going to notice me, you know. But it went more eccentric, you know, all around the block. I mean, Josh paid, you know, professional hookers and seated them in the pods and whatever. So,
Wow.
you know, there were also people who were doing, they had a toxic room that was right next to where people slept that had like toxic like things that could blow up. It wasn't really safe. It didn't have safety exits. You know, it didn't have any security. It had big guns. Alfredo had assault rifles. You know, it was pretty hardcore. Cops were really like, how did they even get it to happen? Because Josh had a license and he said he was making a movie. So in New York City, if you say you're making a movie and you pay your license, you can do anything.
Wow.
So yeah, so they were trying to figure out like it was a suicide cult. And then, you know, they just shut it down. They just shut it down. But I have already been kicked out, so it's okay.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit. I want to make sure we dedicate some time to your work after We Live in Public. Starting, I mean, you mentioned earlier your column in ArtNet and working with Walter, and you mentioned.
Well, actually, you know, that when I had the photo of Conda, the long last photo, that was after We Live in Public. Because Walter was friends with my husband and friends with me and Charlie Finch and all these people. And I was telling them, like that was my job. Hey, this tech guy, Josh, he's doing this big art party and there's this big installation, you know, and you have to come see it. And they were like, you know, typical snobs until they actually went there and it like sort of blew their minds, you know. So, you know, and then it, you know, got a lot of press and it became a movie. So like, what it's on the tail of that I started working for ArtNet, because it gave me, you know, street cred that I called an art situation that everyone else poo-pooed, but it was actually pretty major and won Sundance.
And now so you said now they're making a TV series based on the documentary?
Based on the documentary. So the Quiet was the party that was like 2000. And then, you know, Andy, because it was 24/7 surveillance, right? So they had a lot of footage. So Andy made the film. I think it took her 9 years. Was it 2009 or 2000? Yeah, 2009, which she made a documentary that won Sundance.
We have a question in the chat from Selena's Mountain. I don't know who of y'all is there, but about whether you think there's going to be a resurgence of a rebellious art community in New York City after the pandemic. Olivia and Michael are both there. Okay, so question from Olivia and Michael.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a diviner, you know. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it ever goes away, though. I mean, I think you always have an element of person who is just so driven and they can't make it through the regular channels. I mean, they're just going to have to find a way to let you know they're there. You know, like, mostly it's now pop-up galleries. I don't really know, though. I mean, you know, and I could say, well, a lot of people come from graduate schools, and so they won't. But I mean, I came from graduate school and I was, so I don't know. I also see like that pop up now doesn't necessarily mean New York anymore or Brooklyn. It means like Albuquerque, New Mexico, gazebo. And then there's this woman in Wichita, Kansas. And she does Spider Gallery, and it's like in a barn that's falling down. People seem to want to be in aerospace, you know. So I think it's going to become more global, the badness. I don't know. There's some pretty bad elements now. Not as good, you know.
And Nancy, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about Art Lovers New York, because before we open it up to a more general, open conversation with everyone, if you could talk about your role, yeah.
Okay, so what happened was I was taking photos for Walter, right? And everybody thought like Walter was sending me to the places. They didn't think that I generated the spaces I went to, right? So I like knew the scene. Like I was a paparazzi, so I got to talk to them. And they would tell me my friend is having a show here and the friend's having a show there. So it was very hard on Walter when he would like go to art fairs and people would come up to him and say, oh, who's Devendra Banhart? Oh, yeah, like I was the only photographer at the G's Ben show. And like I have to give Walter credit. He posted these with all my underground artists, and that started the ball rolling for them. But you know, I brought in a picture of Devendra Banhart at some opening, and Walter fired me for like bringing in too many musicians, you know. And like, you know, Meghan Markle, he made me cry. He made me cry in his office, and I'm like, well, you know, like this is how I'm gonna make my name. Like you don't even pay me, you know, like I have to, like if I can't even show like how smart he was at what he was doing, and he's like fired me like 2 days before Christmas from a job that I didn't even get paid for.
Oh my God.
You didn't pay you for the column?
That's how tough the art world was then. Like, well, you're publishing your photos, that should make you happy enough. I have 2 kids to feed, you know.
My God.
Anyway, whatever. So Walter, you know, it was 2005, and by then you could self-publish. You know, when ArtNet started in 2002, you had like ArtNet started as a write-off from the auction house. You had to have that kind of a budget to have the technology to go online and internet and publish. But by 2005, you could self-publish. So I just started up Art Lovers on my own without Walter or anybody above me. And then I was actually more free to just do like more underground. And like, you know, it was
Cool.
a more free thing for me to do. You know, like, I didn't have to go to the mainstream galleries. And like if I wanted to go back to the same gallery month after month, I could do that. And ArtNet, I couldn't do that. And Walter was in charge of my photos, editing them and posting them. So I couldn't always charge money, or I had like little side hustles, you know. And like, if I didn't know I could get the photos published, that was like, you know, difficult. Like, someone promised me some work and I could get them PR and then I couldn't. Yeah. Well, Art Lovers is just like digital quilting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the G-Spence photo were nice, right?
They're great. So yeah, so you're talking about digital quilting. You mentioned being the, I mean, it's sort of wild to think now that you were the only photographer at the G's Bend show. And you also continue to make quilts. So that's also sort of another part of this narrative. I feel like anyone who lives in New York knows like the patchwork hustle of just like trying to like get through the month. Yeah.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, it's just like I feel like everybody I know in New York has like 45 side hustles at all times.
Now are like how many jobs?
And it's so like weaving together, like there's an element of a life in New York which kind of resembles a quilt, the same way that you're talking about, you know, Art Lovers being kind of quilting together different ideas about a show, and you're still making quilts. I was wondering if we might end with your ideas about quilting and what you're making now.
Well, that's a quilt that I'm working on now.
Cool.
And well, it's repair. Like I know you wanted to know about repair. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't actually I don't really make quilts from scratch. Like I like to repair quilts and restore them. It's just more of a challenge to.
And where do you get the quilts from? eBay?
No. I mean, like, you know what unique is?
What do you mean? Like
Salianis.
like a store?
No, thrift shop.
Mm.
Oh no, I don't know who it is.
But you know, like my most prized quilts that are the most valuable that I have, I pay. Well, like that's what's great about Jersey Heights. I paid $2 in a flea market, like in a little flea market store, for $2 each for like like 19th century Junkers.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is like from a thrift shop, and it's a Chinese commercial factory quilt.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't just do
like historical.
right. So it had a lot of like wear on it. Wherever you see a patch, it's only there because there was a hole. It's not designed or.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But like there's definitely like a bears and reindeer narrative that emerges, right?
Right. So yeah. So like yeah. So I mean, I have like a hoarder house, you know.
So behind you, you collect dolls, right? And you collect quilts too.
Right.
You collect.
What else?
Yeah, books or
dishes, like Blue Ridge dishes, ribbons, fabrics, nice. Books on quilting, books on crafts.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Should we open up to any other questions anyone has?
Yeah, Barbara Reed Hopkins had a question about she asked somewhat cryptically teachers ? And PS1 ? So I'm guessing that means who your teachers were and whether I don't know about PS1. Maybe Barbara can ask that question.
Yeah.
But she's asking to know about Guido.
Yeah.
She went to graduate school with me.
Oh, amazing.
Vancouver. She lives in Vancouver. She also had to leave Montreal because she didn't speak French either. she's a great artist. And I
I
could be
know
like,
there was like an exodus of all the non-French speakers. Is
yeah,
that
totally. You know, I mean, this is a very like, you know, politically incorrect thing to say, but after Leonard Cohen, like there was not going to be another one of those coming out of French Canada. That was like, not going to happen again. So,
At the time, wasn't there like a really strong like Quebecois nationalist vein as
yeah,
well in French politics?
what?
Wasn't there like a really strong like Quebecois sort of separatist or nationalist thing going on as well?
In the 70s, yeah. I mean, there were tanks and yeah. I mean, it sounds like I'm on the wrong side of it. I mean, it just depends where you're born in the society. But the thing is, I respect the right. I mean, my teacher was French Canadian, Guido Molinari. I mean, you know, I studied with the most famous French Canadian painter, and but I mean, I wasn't. I didn't get to go to a bilingual school, and so but even if I had, that wasn't going to help me in Quebec because you couldn't represent Quebecois if you were Nancy Smith.
Barbara says Nancy left a really great career in Canada for the streets of New York City, as far as I remember.
wow?
I was out of graduate school. I was already teaching, and I had my work in 2 museums. And so I left, and I took the fall that everybody takes when I come to New York. You all get leveled.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really great place to wrap up the formal part of the evening. So thank you so much, Nancy, for the work, the storytelling, the energy. And I'm gonna stop the recording here.